It's time for another edition of Saturday with Seniors, brought to you by FCCB's local branches in Mansfield, Wellsboro, and Blossburg. Proudly supporting Saturday with Seniors here on KC 101, and they've been a part of our community for over 150 years. FCCB, member FDIC, equal housing lender. And John Bush is our guest today on Saturday with Seniors. And hello, John.
Hello.
How are you?
Fine.
So, John, how old are you?
I'll be 89 in about 10 days.
So pretty soon you'll be turning 89.
Yes.
Where were you from originally?
Knoxville, RD, outside of Knoxville on the New York State border. There's a road between Knoxville and Troopsburg,
Yep.
249 North.
Yep.
And then it turns into 36. Just before it turns into 36 in New York State, there's a road that goes to the left, and that's called North Road. And that goes around and comes out in Westfield.
And that's where you grew up? Was it on a farm? Or
I grew up on a dairy farm, yes. My father had a couple hundred acres, and it bordered on the New York State line.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of dairy farm? I imagine this was not non-modernized back then.
It was, yes. I was born in 33, no electricity. Mm-hmm. Didn't have that until probably 39, 38, somewhere. We had dug well, which was spring-fed, kerosene lamps with a wick.
The Iceman come to your house too, I guess?
Yes. One of the neighbors had a big pond, and he would cut ice in the wintertime and cover it up with sawdust. In the summer, we would use that.
And that would be your refrigerator. So no utility bills, so to speak.
And we also had a battery-operated radio and no TV.
No TV, no phone even? Or did you have a phone?
No, not early on.
No.
And when you get one, there was a crank and a mouthpiece.
Yeah.
And a party line.
Yeah. So the party line you shared, all the neighbors
yeah,
could hear
right.
what you were doing.
Every time you go to calls, you go click, click, click.
I hear the term, was it rubbernecking or rubbering when people listen
rubbering
is the term when people eavesdrop in on the conversations.
Yeah.
Well, so your parents were farmers. Were they always farmers? Is
my father was a farmer. You know, back then, the size of the dairies were only like 20, 25 cows.
Yeah.
And we milked them by hand. No electricity. No bulk milk tanks, no barn cleaners. We cleaned the barn, shoveled it into a wheelbarrow, went up a plank and put it on the wagon, and then hooked the horses up and took it up and spread it by hand.
So it was very, very labor intensive.
Well, it's about like the Amish do now. Mm-hmm. When we cut hay, we cut it with the horses. Had a dump rake to make the furrows. They came out with a hay loader that picked the hay up and pushed it forward on the wagon. And then you take it back to the barn, and there was a track, and they had a fork on it. And you'd put the fork in the hay on the wagon and lock it, and it was hooked up with a pulley, and you hook the horse up to the pulley, and it would pull it up in there, and then you would trip it and dump it. And you mowed it away. You did this continuously.
Wow. I just can't imagine the amount of work that farming was. And did you feel like you were well off financially at the time as a kid looking back?
Well, everybody was in the same boat. Yeah. So I had everything I needed, not everything I wanted. You know, I didn't know any difference. I mean, 10, 12.
Well, you're coming out of the Great Depression here, 1933.
Exactly. I wanted a bicycle, but they didn't make bicycles during World War II. They didn't make them.
I didn't realize that.
I didn't get one until 12 or 13 years old. We picked up tin cans. We got milkweed for parachutes. We were rationed. You know, we go to get flour and sugar from the county seat if we needed it. If we couldn't get it from the store, gasoline, you had a sticker on your car. You could get so many gallons of gas.
So it was pretty tough during those time periods.
But there was nobody on relief. Didn't even know anything about relief. Mm-hmm. It wasn't there.
Yeah.
The families took care of their own.
The churches and the families were really the ones who looked out for everybody else.
Exactly.
And people needed people to look out for them then, too, from at least talking with my grandparents when they lived back in the Great Depression days and after. They were reusing everything they had. Nothing went to waste.
We had outhouses that didn't have toilet paper. We used Sears and Roebuck Catalog or Montgomery Ward or Spiegel. Mm-hmm. They didn't have toilet paper. At least we didn't have it.
Yeah. So where did you do your shopping, and how often did you do any shopping?
Well, we went into either Knoxville or Westfield. A.W. Lugg had a department store, and there was some stores in in Westfield. Never went to Cornell or Elmira or Corning. No, didn't do it.
Just stuck with what you had there.
We didn't have a car when I was first born. I mean, we didn't have a car. We went to places by horses. We go to church. There was a stable next to the church where you could put your horse in, park the buggy or wagon, whatever you came on.
Yeah.
The first car I can remember was a Model T. We didn't have one, but we did have a Model A and a Model B. They were Ford.
Wow. So life without a car and riding a horse into town.
Of course, that's my father's side. My mother was a teacher, and she graduated from high school at 16. Didn't have any money at all. Didn't have money to get a yearbook or a ring. Later on, one of her classmates, when he was older, gave her a yearbook. So she borrowed some money from a lady in town, Brewster. Her name was Brewster. She went to Mansfield Normal for 2 years. She started teaching when she was 18. She went to a one-room schoolhouse in Brookfield. They would go there for 8 years, and then they would go to Westfield to graduate. She had to build a fire. Sometimes she went by horses, or bobsled in the wintertime. And she got $100 a month, 9 months a year, not 12 months, 9 months.
Yeah.
No Social Security, none of that.
No pension program?
No,
just,
nothing. She taught there for 20 years, and then she went to Knoxville for another 20 years. And the school board sent her a letter and said, you're 65, you got to retire. And it made her mad. She didn't like it, and so she hired Tom Wilcox. The school year went from June to June. Her birthday was in July, so they had to let her teach another year. Then she immediately went over across the line into New York State. She taught in Woodhall until they closed that. Then she went to Addison, and she taught 52 years total and ended up getting a good retirement from Pennsylvania, a minimum retire from New York State. And then she, of course, had signed up in the 40s for Social Security.
She had really good work ethics, it sounds like. Loved her work.
They had run the principal out in this one-room schoolhouse in Brookfield, and they had a county superintendent. His name was Walter Clark. He was over here, but he was from Westfield. All the schools were under the county superintendent. They had run the teacher out, so he said, you got to have discipline, and I'll back you up. And she had discipline. She always had discipline.
So is she still with us?
She lived to be over 100. She was born in 1899, and she died in 1999. Her birthday was in July, so she was 100 in July, and she died in September or October. She would have been around 3 centuries.
Wow. That's some really neat stuff. So how long did you live right near the New York border then? What was your next move from there? Did you...
I didn't move at all. I went to high school in Knoxville, the old high school building. And then they had consolidation, which is now Conestoga Valley. But that high school was not built. So I graduated from the old high school in 1951 and got a real good education there. Had some wonderful teachers. We went to school by bus, of course, and I can tell you a story. Jack Murdoch was a senior, and I was probably 10th grade or something. And his father was he had the bus route, and he hired somebody, and the guy quit. So Jack started, he was 16, and his father thought I'd get somebody, and he never did get anybody. Jack would pick us all up. We'd have a bus full and drive us down and park the bus. And then he'd go out 5 minutes early and pick us up. But if it was deer season, he took his rifle along with him.
Yeah.
He was 16 years old, the gun in the bus. You think that would go over nowadays?
Not so smooth, but would he slow down if he saw a deer?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Everybody
you guys all
cared.
helped carry the deer in.
So that's when I grew up. World War II, we didn't have TV, of course. We had radio and newspaper. We used to get the Corning Leader, I believe.
So what was your first job?
Well, I graduated when I was 16 in May, and by the time September rolled around, when my birthday is, I was 17. I went to Mansfield.
Yeah.
I went to Mansfield for 2 years and got a good education. And back then, if I got all the credits in, I went to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and you had to have so many credits that they wanted before you could get in. Now you can't get into veterinary school in 2 years. You have to have 4 years and a degree. And I applied to Cornell because I was right around the corner. But the veterinary school, of course, is supported by state tax dollars, and they're not going to spend money on the Pennsylvania one if they can put somebody in there from New York. So I went down to the University of Pennsylvania, and I was there 4 years. When I was in Mansfield, there was a drugstore right by the red light there. And
Where Cole's Pharmacy was before.
before that,
Yep.
I would help his wife clean their house maybe once a week, and then I work down in his drugstore upstairs, getting the products out and so forth. And I hitchhiked back and forth to school. I didn't have a car. Hitchhiking was safe, and I hitchhiked to Philadelphia many times. We get on the subway and go out to 69th Street, and that's where the turnpike ended. And I'd have a sign. I'd have Weaversport on one side and Harrisburg on the other.
And somebody pick you up and give you a ride, and it worked just fine, huh?
And it was safe. And then later, when I got to be a sophomore, I believe, Paul Mosch was from Gailton, and he was a dentist over in Coudersport. And he had a car, so I started riding with him.
These things we take for granted now that everybody's got a car or two-car, three-car family is...
And when I was at the veterinary school, I worked in a Jewish fraternity. I started out washing dishes, and by the time I was a senior, I was a head waiter, because most of the people that worked there were from the veterinary school. We just pass it on from year to year. So I got my meals, 3 meals a day.
Yes.
And so the only expense I had was for an apartment. And at that time, the state of Pennsylvania needed veterinarians badly, especially large animal ones that would work on dogs or work on cattle and horses.
Sure.
So they paid my tuition. They don't do that anymore either. I got through. I didn't have hardly any expense at all. You know, all I had was the apartment and
thrifty times. You figured out how to get by and how to make it work. So where was your veterinarian practice?
In Knoxville, Northern Tier Veterinary Clinic.
Yeah.
I bought it from an older gentleman, and I think I was in the Army for about a year. I had a commission. I was in ROTC at the University of Pennsylvania, and I could have had a commission in the Veterinary Corps, but I didn't want to waste 2 years. I wanted to practice. I wanted to get out. And so I joined the National Guard over in Mansfield and, went to monthly meetings and summer camp and that type of thing. After I'd done that for a year or two, I was a critical civilian occupation, so I didn't have to go to meetings anymore. So that's how I got my military. I went down to Fort Knox for basic, and then I went down to Fort Sam Houston, Texas, and got out after they had a 6-month program.
That was a short program then for you.
Yeah. So, I don't know, what was your other question? I'm doing all the talking.
I don't know, talk about your practice. How long was that practice for?
I started out by myself, and I think I grossed $10,000 the first year. And back then, they were trying to eradicate brucellosis and tuberculosis. So periodically, we would go around to the farms, either test them for tuberculosis or blood test them for brucellosis. It was quite widespread back there. Brucellosis caused the cattle to abort, and so that was a big loss to the farmer. He didn't get a calf. And the same with the TB, and it would spread. So they had the program to eliminate that, and they also vaccinated young calves with brucella vaccine, and the state would pay me to do that. So in between calls, if I didn't have too many calls that day when I first started out, I would go out and vaccinate calves. I think they paid me $3 to stop and 50 cents a calf or something like that.
So it's just always work there if you needed it for that.
And then we periodically would blood test, and if we found a herd that had a positive cow for brucellosis in it, she was condemned, and they would come around and give them beef price or a little more maybe, and they had to get rid of the cow. They had to keep doing that until they were all negative. And the same with the tuberculosis. And they've eradicated brucellosis and
so they were successful with that, which is good.
From the state of Pennsylvania.
Sure. Yeah.
And most of the other states are now.
You remember the 72 flood? Were you around that area then? And before the days of Kauneski Lake and the railroads? And tell me about
my wife and I lived over the clinic for a couple of years, and I think we got an apartment downtown. And we decided to build a house up 249 from Knoxville towards Austinburg. Dom Sama built my house. He excavated and put it in the basement and all the cinder block and all that. And that's about the time the flood came along. And it took all the fill that they had taken out of there. We had planted down around the creek there. It ended up down in Corning and Elmira.
Yeah.
And of course, it was hard to get
a lot of stuff.
It was hard to get lumber back there, but we did finish the home. And then since then, I sold that home and went up the road a mile and built another home. My wife is from Mansfield. She's very interesting. You ought to interview her and her sister. Her sister lives
I would love to.
her sister is Jean Close.
Gene, if you're listening, you can do this.
They're identical twins, and I do mean identical.
They really are identical. If you ask them,
yeah.
they'll have the same.
Few times I went to the door, didn't know one from the other.
Wow.
And we've been married.
First.
We'll be married 62 years in December.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Where did you go on your honeymoon? Do you remember?
We had made reservations in Jamaica.
Wow. But everyone else like Niagara Falls, the Poconos, New York City.
I had been in practice. I got out of school in 58, and we didn't get married until 1960. And my wife had got a teacher's degree. Her father was Bert Francis. He had the marching band. He was the head of the music department at college for several years. And the two girls were never separated until Jean got married. She married Ted Bassonsony's son from Mansfield, Jim Bassonsony. Mm-hmm. And about 6 months, a year later, I married Lois. And they had gotten jobs in Harrisburg. They taught in Harrisburg for a year or two before they got married. And that's the first time. They started out in kindergarten. They were going to separate them when they were in fourth or fifth grade. And they separated them. And they started to cry, so they put them back together again. But the
Inseparables.
It happens every time my wife comes to Wellsboro. They think it's Gene, and the Gene goes there. Uh-huh. They could write a book on what happens when they're identical. To the point of, we have iPhones. My sister-in-law can get into my wife's iPhone and vice versa.
From the facial recognition, it thinks it's the same person.
Yeah.
Wow.
I called Apple. I called Apple about it, and they can't do anything about the folder. So, but my wife has traveled all over the world. It's hard to name a place that she hasn't been, and I don't like to travel, so she went on twice. And as soon as our children got out of the house, she started traveling. She taught 30 years at elementary school in first grade, pretty much. And Jean taught down here in the Montessori. And Jean taught before she married Vic Close. She was married to Jim Bassonsony, and she was up in Connecticut and taught up there, so they both taught.
Sure. Any other memories when you were a child? Some of the stores that you missed, restaurants you went to, movies, entertainment, things little quick stories you can share?
We didn't, we had gasoline was probably 3 gallon for $1. Soft drink was a nickel, candy bars for a nickel. And we had this one kind of a general store. He had a big barrel, Cracker Barrel, and like that type of stuff in there, and wooden floors,
Yeah, the good old days, and floors creaked, and wood stoves, coal stoves kept you warm and everything. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing your time and your story with us here on the station. It's really interesting to hear what life was like. What do you got there?
Well, I had some interesting things here. When I first started practice, I went on a call across the border in New York State, and I was coming back, and somebody come running out. This was a secondary road, a 2-lane highway.
This is a veterinarian call you're talking about.
Yeah, I went out on a call, and I came back, and somebody was out by the road with his hands. Well, apparently they had shot somebody. I don't know who they were. They had shot somebody, and they disappeared. But I went back in there a couple hundred yards, and this guy got shot in the arm. Yeah, he survived, but they never did find out who it was. And another time, I think it was in Knoxville, there was one of the gas trucks was pulled over to the side of the road, and it was running, and it wasn't parked parallel, it was kind of an odd, and I looked in there, and the guy had hit a coronary. He was all purple,
Oh, jeez,
he was dead. The veterinary degree. The University of Pennsylvania gives VMD. All the other veterinarians around have Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, DVM. Mm-hmm. If it's VMD, it's because the University of Pennsylvania was one of the first veterinary schools, and it was connected to the medical school. So we got a veterinary medical doctor degree instead of Doctor of Veterinary Medicine.
Neat little pieces of tidbits of time.
Yeah. I went to school to my mother, 5th grade.
With your mother? Or to your mother?
I went to her. She taught.
She was your teacher in 5th grade.
It's when she went to Knoxville. And she tried to get the school board or the principal that he wouldn't do it. So I went to school to her.
Uh-huh. You didn't get away with nothing there.
She treated me worse than she did everybody else, I think.
And this was a one-room schoolhouse that you went to?
Oh, no, this was the high school in Knoxville.
Okay.
About a year ago, we had 5 veterinarians. I was there for 3 years, and then I probably had 6 or 8 different people come. They'd stay a couple of years. We did 90% large animal, 10% dog and cat. And then it reversed itself. We were doing 10% large animal. We covered a big area. We went all the way to Colorsport. We went up into Canisteel, Greenwood, Troopsburg, Jasper, Addison.
That's a big area. Yeah.
And we had Motorola two-way radios. And first I had 2 people, and then we got up to 4. And 2 of us would stay in the office, and 2 were on the road. And one day we'd go to west, and then the other days we'd go north. And we'd give them a break on the mileage if they would arrange the call. Instead of going out 20 miles to this, the next call was in Lawrenceville and then up to Jasper,
So you could stack them up and, save some driving.
But in 1998, we quit doing large animal. And Dr. Saxon came with me in, I think, 69 or 70. And he's still there. He's 75. And we have 2 females with him, with us. Dr. Reynolds, who was from Wellsboro. She's worked for us for 2 or 3 years. And then we have Dr. Cochran. There's 4 of us.
So it continues on to this day. Yeah.
And I work part-time. I work half days. And Dr. Cochran does the same. She has 3 young children.
Well, good. Still working at, you said 8.
So I was going to mention Social Security.
Yes.
I filed for Social Security, I think, when I was 65 or 66.
You can remember back that long ago?
But I pay Social Security because I'm still working. So I pay 15%. I pay the employer and the employee. So I pay 15% on every dollar I make.
The government really doesn't want you working at this age for whatever reason.
Well, I've been blessed with good health. The most influential people in my life would be my mother and my wife. But I had a lot of good college professors and high school teachers. Back when I was in high school, we had discipline.
There was respect and there was discipline. And, kids were... It was a whole different world back then. And I don't know. What do you think about today's world versus that world? We messed it up or what?
I don't know.
Well, John Bush, thank you so much for joining us here on Saturday with Seniors, brought to you by FCCB, First Citizens Community Bank.